Brandon, let's get into it. You watched all of, I believe, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and I was a big fan of Haunting of Hill House, but haven't watched Bly Manor yet. You said, and I quote, that you had a hot take.
Sure. Well, we debated doing a spoiler mode on it, and we weren't sure if we were going to have time. I didn't really have time to gobble it up right away. I finished it much later than friends, but I watched it with Amanda, and we were thinking maybe like sharing a mic and doing our own like spoiler mode. But we're like, I don't want to dump on it because Huber brought up a really excellent point. Huber has endured some loss in his family recently, and I had a lot of criticisms for the season, and then I would talk to Huber, and he said that resonated with me more than most television I've watched recently, and I just all of a sudden had a completely different take on the whole season. I was like, oh, that's an excellent point. And what they've done, Mike Flanagan, I think, is the director, the guy who did both of these seasons. There's so many interesting things that's going on, and there were some really great performances and just the general craft of the whole thing. Like I really appreciate. I used to really be into the American Horror Story. I really liked the first 2 seasons, and then season 3 started to kind of go off the rails a little bit. And then by 4, I was like, this is just Looney Tunes. I'm out. It's just not. It's spooky, but it's so weird and over the top and sensational. And then it's Hill House came along, and I'm like, here we go. Old creaky wood, basements and attics, and lace blowing in the wind. Okay, yeah, this is kind of Haunted Mansion style. This is more my vibe. And I think it's such a fun modern take. But the first season was a lot about mental health, I think. There was a lot about perception and kind of struggling with, did I see that? What am I going through personally? And this one was very much about loss. And I didn't really grasp onto that because I was super critical of their British accents and all sorts of weird things comparing it to the first season. Whereas Huber was it just immediately hit, and he was drawing all these connections. So it was neat through his eyes to look back on the season and be like, totally. They really wrestled with some cool stuff. I just thought some of the story beats were weird, but we can get into that.
When I watched Hill House, I feel like I really didn't know much about it going in, and I just became obsessed with it. I burned through that show as fast as I could. And I got so attached to the characters. I know that some of the actors from Hill House are in Bly Manor as different characters.
It's totally different thing.
Yeah, is that weird at all?
Sure.
Well, just for you.
It's not universally weird. You've heard me gripe about that stuff, Ben. That's just extremely strange to me. Also because one guy strides in with a British accent now, and you're like, oh, another guy's Scottish, and actually has a pretty damn good Scottish accent. But good guys play bad guys, and so there is a little bit of that flop. That actually is also similar to American Horror Story. They hung on to the cast, and they're all great performers. It was a little distracting. There's one episode later on where another actor shows up, and it's it's hard for me. It's like the meme with Leonardo DiCaprio from Hollywood where he's like, hey, and he's pointing, I'm just like, oh, it's that person. And it's like, well, I don't want to be thinking that. I want to be into the story. I want to be, who's this woman? Instead of oh yeah, what's her name? So that's not really just kind of the headspace of where I want to be. But I'm also sympathetic to writers, directors that are like, I had a lot of fun working with those people. I want to work with them again. They're really talented, and they're committed to this project. I already got them going. That's why Scorsese says he works with De Niro again and again. He's like, I don't have to worry about him. We can show up and get right to work. But the accents was a little interesting. I've seen people on social media talking to people from the UK being like, how'd you take that? And they're like, they work great, but it can be a stretch sometimes, to believe that stuff. But the setting was good. It also wasn't as scary as season 1. Season 1 rocked me.
Had some really good moments.
Woohoo! Really crawled up my spine in a couple instances. Even just kind of thinking about it, kind of like where Poltergeist and The Ring sit for me. These movies that really impacted me. Even just thinking about it in passing is I know it's not real, and I wouldn't gasp if I saw it again, but just that concept. Whereas this was very heavy with emotion. It was very soap opera-y too. There were lots of subterfuge and twists and backstabbing and stuff, and so it was a little more drama than less scares. But IGN did a thing on the ghosts that are in the background. So I don't know if you saw. Do you see Hill House Blood?
No.
So one thing that they did that I wish
Trying
more
to follow, but yeah.
I wish more horror did, because one of the things that I hate when modern horror does is when something like creeps by in the background and the soundtrack's like, someone's in the background, and I'm like, I can see someone's in the background. Stop.
Right.
You know, like, you don't need to call attention to everything. Surprise me. And there's a lot of, you really gotta, you know, it's like, Where's Waldo? You really gotta keep your eyes peeled. And I clicked on the IGN article. It's like, I might have missed some, and like, I missed like 50. Like there were just so many. There's like an arm or like a head popping up through a window, or there's just a constant presence of all of
in Hill House or Bly Manor?
different characters. In both.
Okay.
Specifically, Bly Manor was the article I looked up and was like, whoa. So it's like, you know, I don't recommend pausing every frame, you know, like a highlights magazine, but it's just a fun. They're having a good time, you know. Like, this is a crew, and it's very much, if you liked Hill House and you're in the mood in this season for that kind of vibe, like, totally delivers. I just it was one of those things where Amanda and I kind of looked at each other when we were done. We were like, that was odd. Just some character choices, some stuff kind of just was left out there, like I said, just a bit more drama, less scare.
I think I have this weird mental barrier with this, where I liked Hill House so much that I think I'm a little bit nervous about watching Bly Manor, because I feel like I'm just going to be constantly comparing the two. And Hill House hit such a high bar for me that I'm like, oh, like I feel like if it isn't as good, it's going to extra disappoint me, just because I was so invested in Hill House. And I don't know, that kind of like turns me off from watching it. But at the same time, you mentioned the vibe, and if you like that vibe, you should definitely give this a chance. And I do. I love the style of Hill House, but I've heard Huber's probably the only one that I've seen take from where he's like, oh, I liked it a lot. I loved it. I've kind of gotten a general sense that people don't think it's quite as good, and I think that's kind of made me hesitant. But,
well, it's again, just going from the scare into more of like a drama focus is kind of a dip, just in terms of expectations. It's kind of like it was 9 episodes instead of 10 as well. It's also a shorter cast. Season 1 bounced around to a lot of like 10 years ago, 2 years ago. You know, like, you need to understand all of these different story things that have happened. You had all the members of the family plus their families, where it's really just like 7 people, like the whole thing. You know, it's really just focusing on a very specific, focused family tale, which, like, there's some characters, there are characters in season 2 that I love way more than a lot of people in season 1, where I'm just like, I love this person, I care about them, I don't want anything bad to happen to them. There's these 2 kids that are the center of it, where horror with kids is rough. If you have a kid who just can't pull it off, if you have like a Jake Lloyd in episode 1, it's like, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing we can do, I can't pretend to like this kid, you know. And they're exceptional, you know, they're wise beyond their years. Which is always really great. Like, the kid in The Ring was really good. The kid in The Babadook is really good. And it's just like, it's a make or break for me, like, if that's going to sell it. And Henry Thomas, who is in E.T., you know, he comes back. Yeah, everyone's just, and Jared, just some really standout performances. But being careful, try not to talk about too much.
You mentioned that it's less scary, which I think is totally fine. I don't even think that that's necessarily this huge criticism, but it is just a tough time, because right now in this moment at the end of October, I want to be scared, right? Like I specifically want to watch things that are going to be spooky or especially that. And I'm sure that's in there to some degree, but hearing it's less scary, it's just like, maybe not what I want right this second.
At the same time, what I think happened to American Horror Story is it just tried to constantly outshock itself, you know, and so that's when I just got disinterested, because I was like, why, this doesn't make any sense. So I'm fine with them taking a different route, you know, in terms of what they're going to do with the story. Because for people that don't know, Hill House was based on The Haunting, I think is the original story. If you go see the Liam Neeson movie, which is on like Amazon or something, or on HBO, it's based on that. So they took these existing characters and were like, how can I connect this across a series, across 10 episodes? And they did the same thing with Bly Manor, based on Henry James's Turn of the Screw. And so it's like much more, where Turn of the Screw is like, this all went to this house and spooky things happened. And this show's like, no, let's get into this. Like, what, like, really, why are these things happening? Where did this ghost come from? What are the stories behind it? How is it affecting everybody? And so from a literary standpoint, it's just kind of fun to deconstruct that way. So like, I hope this goes on and on and on forever. I hope they get like 6 more seasons, because even if we get like, oh, that's not necessarily what I would have done with that book, but that was cool. It was like, that was neat. And I'm super glad, it's like I could criticize this all day. This is why I'm tempted to do that spoiler mode, but like no regrets for watching it. And most certainly if like we get maybe 2 more seasons and then that's it, I could totally see myself going back and watching all of it again, 10 years from now or something. Cause it's just like, it's rare you get this kind of Guillermo del Toro, slow, deliberate classic horror. That is modern. I think it's like in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, the Bly Manor takes place. But there's just something, it just has a connection to, 19th century, old house lore. The Others with Nicole Kidman, just that kind of vibe. Always there for that.
Not really a great point to bring up, but I just want to say Del Toro is a goddamn genius. Like,
yeah, he's a hard man to criticize. Like, I didn't like what was the Red House? What is it called?
Crimson Peak. Crimson Peak.
Yeah, that was okay. I thought the story was kind of predictable, and I wasn't but visually, it's just like, you're a genius. Like, it's just his aesthetic is so good, and Pan's Labyrinth is one of the best movies I've ever seen.
I think Pan's Labyrinth is a masterpiece. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah.
Yeah. Masterpiece and genius are 2 words I really try not to label too many things.
Sure.
Pan's Labyrinth is a masterpiece.
Yeah, I feel like I could say that without hesitation. Brandon, you made me think of a missed opportunity because this was last year, but we both saw the movie Us, and I remember you, because I loved Jordan Peele's Us, and I remember you not liking it as much, and I think that conversation would have been better when it was both fresh in our minds, but I wish we could have talked about that because I don't know what you didn't like about it.
Oh, Ben, I mean, you heard me talk about Terminator 2, man. I'll rip into a movie anytime you want.
Sure.
Anytime anybody wants. I got it. It's like little files. Like, hold on a second. Flip. Here we go. All right, Us. So this part's implausible over here, and
have you seen
a little overacted over here? No,
Midsummer, Brandon?
Yeah.
You have? Did you like it?
More than Us, for sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Midsummer's just...
Yeah, oof. I love Midsummer.
Midsummer's like an enema. Midsummer's just like...
It's a trip.
Did I enjoy that? I guess. Like,
right.
I don't know if I would watch Midsummer again. Oof.
I would, I think. But I totally get where you're coming from. I adore that ending. But anyway, getting a little bit off track here. You mentioned American Horror Story, Brendan, and I do want to touch on this because I've been very interested in American Horror Story, and I feel like I've dabbled in it just a tiny bit. But I run into this problem where I feel like there's so much American Horror Story now that it's like, do I really want to commit to this? People see, like you're saying, like, oh, it just falls off a cliff. And it's like, is it really worth like trying to enjoy and then only to get to like season 3 or 4 and you're like, oh, now suddenly it's garbage? I don't know.
Just watch 1 and 2 and then you're done. And you don't have to worry about story continuation because it's its own thing.
Okay.
3 is The Coven, which is like, okay, like part of it's like really cool. And then it's one of those shows that's just like, now we're just going to party. You're like, all right, where'd the plot go? Like, and then 4 was like the circus. And I was like, no, I'm out. It's like one of those scenes I just want to say, just because legitimately this is because I'm such a nerd, like this is just the dumb stuff. This woman gets like kidnapped by the circus, and then like the next day she wakes up and they're like, we recorded you while you were sleeping, and this is like in the 50s, and so she's like, what? And they like, she's watching video of her the night before, and it's edited, and it's just like, I can't, as an editor, I can't stop imagining. It's like, wait, so you filmed this last night, processed the film, and then spliced it at like 3 a.m. just to spook this girl you kidnapped on a whim yesterday? Click. It's like, I'm out. Like, where it just becomes, which it can be fun. Like, Blood, you just finished Legion. And Legion's like very weird and very silly, very intentionally, goofy, but I get where it's going. Whereas like, when American Horror Story does that and then later is like, okay, back to being scary. It's like, you're done. I can't, you're not going to get me in that mood again after,
sure.
You had like 4 clowns do some weird thing, like,
I don't know. I think Stevie Nicks does a cameo in
3.
Okay.
That's where it gets, that's where it gets a little off the rails, but
I'm just a big Stevie Nicks fan. And so good or bad, I kind of want to see it. I kind of want to see it.
Because she's, Stevie Nicks has always been kind of into mysticism, and she sings about it, she talks about it, and so the Covens are like, she's one of us. So it's a fun cameo.